Welcome to the Startups Roundtable podcast, where we discuss the science and art of startups with founders and the broader startup community. I'm Tony Hackett, and I've spent over a third of my B2B sales career either working for early stage startups or as a go-to-market and social selling mentor for founders and their teams. In each episode, we will explore various topics, including decision-making, team building, and growth strategies. Before we meet today's guest, I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. Here in Sydney, it's the Gadigal people. We pay respect to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people attending today. Today, my guest is Gasparic, co-founder of Fairmart, where their technology and services empower communities by accelerating local commerce. They do this by building products that remove the operational complexities of running a local store, and in doing so, they support the digital transformation of small businesses, which, as we know, are the backbone of every major economy. So let's get to it and meet Jan.
Hi, Tony. Thanks so much for having us here. My name is Jan. I'm the CEO of Fermart, and happy to tell you a little bit about how we got here. I'm originally Slovenian, but I've spent most of my professional and personal life around Southeast Asia. And 2 years ago, I co-founded Fairmart. And Fairmart is a community commerce company. It's our mission to essentially drive more commercial transactions within your local neighborhood. But yeah, I co-founded the company with my business partner and co-founder, Daniil. What originally turned us on to the problem was just how difficult it is to find specific products in your neighborhood. So happy to tell you a little bit more about that. But it seems like a very simple problem, but the deeper we dug into it, the more apparent it was this is a challenge that a lot of everyday communities face and a lot of businesses face as well.
So let's dig into that in a moment, but I've got to say, and I feel obliged to timestamp, when you say we started a couple of years ago, what that actually means is you started at the start of COVID, and that brings with it a lot of implicit and explicit challenges. What did it feel like at the time, and how did you stay the course?
Oh, great question. First of all, my co-founder and I, we met in Entrepreneur First. So that's a local talent incubator here in Singapore. And essentially what they do is that it's about a group of 60 people. Half of them are technical, half of them are business oriented. You're supposed to come in and essentially brainstorm ideas, and you have 3 months to come up with something. And that was flat in the middle of COVID. So I met him even essentially before the start of the program, and we started to brainstorm different projects that we could work together. But the early days, he was based in New Zealand. I was based in Hong Kong. So we started the company completely remotely. We were shipping hardware prototypes back and forth, a lot of hours on Zoom. So in that sense, our genesis was very much of the age of COVID. But the problem that we're solving has been around for a long time. And I think it's been faced by business for some time. Just COVID accelerated in the sense that there was an ever more urgent need for physical retailers to be able to digitize their business. And that can mean a lot of things. Digital does not necessarily mean only e-commerce, but they definitely need to have a digital presence and have a digital strategy that supports them being a retail business.
So with COVID driving a certain amount of thinking and your programmatic approach, is it also fair to say that the upside of you starting around the beginning of COVID is that we all became a little bit more aware and in touch with our local communities?
Yeah, probably due to a sense of absence, because we were suddenly cut off and you had to rebuild these relationships in a digital manner. But one thing that we did to, give you a sense of just kind of what happened in terms of shopper behaviors globally, a lot of traditional behaviors in the sense of how people went about finding their goods and so on, whether it was groceries or things for their hobbies, a lot of those interactions suddenly went digital. For anybody who hadn't previously experienced online e-grocery shopping, you definitely did during COVID at some point, right? Even my parents are in their 70s, they've made the conversion, and I don't think they're going back, they save a lot of time that way. So post-COVID, shopper behaviors are absolutely digital, and that's here to stay. But that doesn't mean that all shopper behaviors are only within the digital realm. And what I mean by this is that very common journey today is that people will start a search through online. They'll search for a specific product online, expecting to find it in the physical world. And oftentimes, when you do this, you will actually only see online e-commerce listings. Especially here in Singapore, you'll see a lot of Shopee and Lazada, even though your local neighborhood store might actually have that product. But because your local stores aren't digitizing their inventory, they're not coming up in those search results. COVID made that extremely apparent, but even post-COVID, that digital behavior for shoppers is here to stay.
The world that you live in, I expect that you you're at the risk of being overwhelmed with data, being able to analyze trends, demographic patterns, so on and so forth. How quickly or how readily do you allow your own feel or intuition to come into your decision making and strategy setting?
Good question. And when we started Fairmart, it first started off definitely on a hunch or a feel. Where it's like, hey, like if I'm searching for this product, why can't I see the local store? Why is this so difficult? And it's kind of like and it starts off that. And then we started to put some data to that. Like, well, okay, like how many retailers are there? It's like, oh my gosh, it's actually a huge market. I believe in Southeast Asia, the market is something like 670 billion annual turnover for physical retail. So it's an enormous market compared to e-commerce, which is within like the 30 or so billion. So we saw that by any measurement, physical retail even today was the majority of the market. And in most spaces, roughly about 95% of all transactions still happen in the physical world. It's just that very few people were building for that segment and solving for that segment. And and stores had few digital tools that were built around the way that they work. So I think it's important to have both. Like hunches are great and intuition is a great way to sort of start your thinking process, but you definitely want to back that up with data over time. And this feeds into our product development process as well.
How do you go about growing your customer base and going and convincing people to think about you as a pathway to profitability?
When we first started Fairmart, we just noticed like, hey, we do these local searches, we don't see local stores. So we wanted to go and talk to the local stores. What's their realities? How are they experiencing this? And they're like, yeah, we try to go online, but like for a typical retail store, they generally have like around 1,500, 2,000 plus unique products. They're very SKU heavy, to use the industry terminology. And that compares to a home-based business or an online-only business, which might have only like maybe 200, 300 products. What we quickly found is that for a lot of stores, even pre-COVID, they were more or less sold on the fact that like, hey, we need to have some sort of digital presence. Retail is still where they generate most of their revenue, but they need to have some way to have a digital presence to drive in-store transactions. That was very clear for them. But what they found is that, hey, like the tools available to them today, all they could do was just to manually list products online. So that was our first thing. Like, okay, like if we want to work for these customers, we need to build a product around the way the customer works and build it to their realities. And that's how we ended up with our workflow of automatically scanning products and then software that digitizes them and puts them online.
So you're bringing not just a new channel to market for businesses, but you're helping them improve their processes as well. Is that what you're describing?
Absolutely. And very common misconception is that, first of all, that digital is the same as e-commerce. It is not. You can use digital to drive in-store transactions. You absolutely can. Google Maps is a great example of that, where we're doing software searches to find something in the real world. And to unpack some of those assumptions for stores is extremely important. So when we go in, we tell our story, but we try to put it into their perspective. Say, hey, your life is like this today. And if you want to grow your business online, it's very important that you're able to use digital tools to also drive your in-store transactions, not just online transactions.
As a co-founder, we all bring our own biases and preference and strengths and joys to our roles. I'm curious two-parter for you. What is it that you love doing? And then how have you been able to convince yourself not to procrastinate on something that you have to do that you actually don't love doing?
Wow, great question. What do I love doing? I love the product side of things. I love being able to map out a process and then being able to essentially build technology that makes that process more efficient and digitizes it. And then seeing that being put to use is incredibly rewarding. What do I dislike? I mean, doing a startup, you're always getting hit from all sorts of sides in terms of all the different things that you need to do. But one of the things that nobody ever tells you about, just like the massive amount of administration work that you have around like running a business. And it's super unexciting, but like the nuts and bolts of your business are very important and something you don't really see in the corporate world. That's definitely not a side that I particularly enjoy, but it's, part and parcel of what you need to do in order to keep the ship moving.
It's interesting you say that. It just reminded me of an earlier guest I had, Tim Demetrio from PencilPay. And I can't remember exactly what I said, but I might have alluded to the excitement of a startup. And Tim said, he didn't say this, but he kind of said, you're missing the point. It's hard work. I'm sort of summarizing it and bad paraphrasing, but it was like, yeah, it is. And the innovation's a little bit a version of what you just said. The innovation's fun and all the excitement's fun. But at some point, you got to realize it is a business, and just every day, the stuff you got to do is running a business.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's just, there's no, you're kind of stuck running most of the things yourself, especially in the early days. So being able to understand what your priorities are, picking your battles, and just trying to phase things out a little bit. Like I feel a lot of people get stuck with trying to solve too many things at once, and it's easy to get discouraged and overwhelmed in the process. So you got to take things day by day, take things step by step.
That's an interesting point. So the whole decision making is something that, I suppose, in a way, it kind of fascinates me, and I'm always wanting to understand. If you went back 2 years, are you a better decision maker today than you were 2 years ago?
Gosh, I certainly hope so, but I don't know if I have the data to back that up.
You got me. I was going to ask you that. So I wanted a fact. Yeah. So experience, obviously more experienced.
Yeah, learned a lot. So I used to work at DJI for 5 years, and it's the world's biggest manufacturer of commercial and consumer drones. And one thing that our CEO always alluded to there was that innovation is an empirical process in the sense that you really do need to experiment. You need to test how things work in the wild. And oftentimes when you're trying to build something from the ground up, you make a lot of inherent assumptions, or you miss bits of how a customer might, what the customer's life essentially is. And like, you don't live their life. And if you're lucky enough to live their life, then yeah, maybe you can catch some of these things. But in many cases, like there's just a lot of empirical context that you do not have until you get something out there and see what happens. And this process of getting something out and seeing what happens is very obviously nerve wracking. I have very, very strong memories of our first customer conversations where we're moving from like essentially experiments to getting our first paying customers, and this kind of a very serious moment of truth. And gosh, are we really ready? Should we delay it some more? But like, you got to kind of pull out the Band-Aid sooner or later and see where you're at, right? So in terms of decision making, we're not even close to mastering it. But I think when we look at our approach, we think it's the right one just because we see that feedback and evolve our product from that. I hope that we're improving our decision-making process. I think we definitely are, but that empirical feedback loop is super important. But at the same time, when you're building a company, you're of course trying to project out 5-10 years. You are of course making a lot of assumptions based on assumed certainties when they may not be that case. And of course, reality is also changing. The market is changing. Like, it's not a static thing. So the environment that you're working in is also, and the circumstances that you're working in are changing. Like, you saw a lot of COVID-related startups that came out and are they going to be able to sustain their business post-COVID when we go to some sort of a more normal world? It'll be interesting, right? But yeah, for us, in terms of making decisions, just trying to move quickly, getting feedback, and then evolving that out is critical and a core part of our process.
You mentioned before about accelerator and startup programs. Would you recommend that to other early stage founders?
Yeah, absolutely. And Entrepreneur First, I think, was a great one for us because, it's a great program where you want to go down the path of creating a company and just, finding a co-founder. Finding a technical co-founder is probably one of the most difficult things that any startup will go through. And unless you have somebody immediate that you can pull from your network and somebody that's good and you trust, you kind of have to go at it cold. And Entrepreneur First is a great program for getting around that. And it gives you a great format in terms of understanding, what do early stage investors look for? How should you think about early stage ventures? How do you generate proof points? And how do you tell a story around that? Like, all that is super useful. It's not necessarily right for every single startup, but for the stage that we were at, because I didn't have a co-founder, I wanted to start a company. I didn't have a very specific idea of like the area that I wanted to focus on, but I wanted to kind of go through the process and take this on. An accelerator like Entrepreneur First is great. And then after that, we went to an incubator called Hacks. So they're specifically related to hardware, but their role is to help you accelerate just the development of your hardware, where you go from a concept to an early stage prototype. And for many early stage hardware oriented startups, they can struggle with that early stage hurdle. So having the expertise and support from that community was very helpful for us.
Yeah, and when you think about strategy and you look at sort of that Horizon 1, Horizon 2, Horizon 3, could I maybe get you to comment in that Horizon 2 field and maybe comment around where you think retail will be and the role for Fairmart in that world?
There's a common misconception that digital is the same as e-commerce. It is not. Physical retail is digitally enabled today. You use digital POS systems, you use digital payment systems. The experience is very, very much digital today. So the bit where we come in, it's like, hey, how can we digitally enable these stores? And the specific angle for us is visibility of inventory online. So that when you search for specific products, you actually see local stores. And for example, even larger platforms like Google and Facebook, a lot of their business is based off of SME customers. So they want SMEs to be successful on their platforms. But a key way for a local retailer to stand out from the pack is based on the unique products that they carry. And of course, their proximity to the customer. To put it very simply, Fairmart facilitates that. We facilitate that by automatically digitizing their inventory and making that available online.
The interesting thing you raised there that caught my attention, I think about the banks in Australia and the battlefield. It feels to me, at least my interpretation over the last, well, for many years, but certainly the last 2 years, even heightened, is around small to medium business. Seems to be a true battleground. If I think about the Australian marketplace, one of the major banks is the dominant market share owner of the youth market, but that's small to medium business, and people are going hammer and tongs to try and secure that. So there's opportunity there. The payment side of it is obviously what the banks are looking at. Do you look at payments in a very particular lens, or you think about it just as a component of the digitization?
We take a look at it from just as a component of the digitization. Broadly in Southeast Asia, there's a lot of digital wallets and digital payment providers. A lot of investment has gone into that even pre-COVID. In terms of inventory visibility, like nobody has really touched that per se. Like the state-of-the-art solutions is manually uploading products rather than integrating with the workflow of physical store to automatically list things online. And there's a specific reason for it. Like it's a technically hard problem to solve. It's not easy. And there's a lot of variability we don't necessarily see with payments. But for us, when we look at the future of digital retail, of modern 21st century digital retail post-COVID, it is, first of all, it's definitely physical. That's not going away. E-commerce will continue to grow, but are we going to lose every single physical store out there? I really don't think so. Like, and my bet, and the bet of Fairmart, is that that's not going to happen. And I think the data supports that. And one of the interesting data points that we see is that, so Fairmart supports both in-store transactions and e-commerce as well. One of the interesting things is that we see a 6 times higher conversion rate for in-store queries. So when people look for directions to the store, they can WhatsApp and chat with the store. That is a much higher conversion rate than people just buying online and getting it delivered. I think that's very interesting because, especially in a market like Singapore, if you want to buy something online, it's a fairly solved problem. There's a whole bunch of different marketplaces that you can buy from. But if you want to know, like, hey, I'm out in my neighborhood, which store has which product in stock? That is not clear. And that is where Fairmart comes in. And that's where we see this higher rate of conversion for in-store transactions.
What are the categories of services that you provide to your customers?
We're an early stage startup, so we try to keep things as simple as possible. But when a customer signs on to Fairmart, what happens is that we give them our IoT device, which is a simple barcode scanner that they install in store, and they plug it into their POS, and that essentially gives us a real-time feed of the products that are available in that store. The core part of our company is software that'll automatically take those barcodes and generate online product listings and display them in a simple digital storefront. So from the perspective of the store manager, like, they use this device on a day-to-day basis. They're using a barcode scanner anyway as part of the checkout process every day. So they don't have to change anything in their workflow. They just use our device instead. As a result of this, they're able to list all their products online. Now, if they want to go the whole hog and start supporting e-commerce, we have the infrastructure to support that. But if they just want to use those listings to get people in store, that's also available.
Your co-founder, when you met, was in New Zealand. You were in Hong Kong, and you're now in Singapore. Is your co-founder there as well?
Yes, absolutely. We both relocated to Singapore to pursue this full time.
And what made Singapore the right place for you to be based?
In terms of a hub for Southeast Asia, Singapore, it's second to none to be in Singapore. But there is a lot of support from the government in terms of technology startups, really substantial support, both in terms of starting up a business, how easy it is to do that. It's generally fairly low touch in terms of administrative burden and your filings and so on. And then the third would just be the investor community. There's a very substantial investor community here. And if you're looking to build up a technology startup, like for Southeast Asia, this is really the place to do it. As compared to Hong Kong or New Zealand, which were our other options, this is definitely the far more advantageous place.
question that's kind of associated with the accelerators and the like before that I like to pose as we get to the tail of our conversations around mentors and coaches. Could I ask you to share your experience? And if there was somebody listening to this right now, they're thinking about a startup and they might be thinking about getting underway, what would be your learnings and recommendations about finding the best mentors and coaches to help?
We were very lucky in the sense that we had two great advisors as part of the company. Both had very substantial experience that they could advise us on. When you have a few years of working experience behind you, you definitely have an advantage there because you have a network to pull on and can bring people in. And that helps you just develop the business in a different way. But you definitely want to find people that, of course, have relevant experience, that you have ideally some sort of professional working history with, because then you understand the context of their experience, if you know what I mean. And also their levels of expertise, what they're good at, what some of their weaknesses might be. So professional context definitely helps a lot. In the absence of that, I think just taking it slow. If somebody's genuinely interested to mentor or advise your business, they will take the time to learn about you both as people, learn about you and the business that you're building, and over time, you can build that rapport with them. And then lastly, the way that we handled it is that we had very specific asks and goals in mind when we were working with our advisors and our mentors. So we wrote them down, we have an informal agreement, and that helps a lot just in terms of just setting expectations for everybody and also, getting people to invest in that commitment too.
One thing that you've triggered in my mind, do you think there's a place for almost stages of mentors and coaches? So maybe whatever stage it is you're moving through, it's not about picking and staying with the one mentor or the small set that you started with all the way through?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely different mentors for different stages. And the best coaches and mentors aren't going to have the answers for you, but they help you ask the right questions. Because frankly, you're the only one who's going to have the full picture, and it's your job as a founder to make those decisions anyway. But they can act as great sounding boards and help you zoom out a little bit and take a little bit of a bigger picture and get a sense of am I just operating with my blinders on and just too focused on this one single problem, or should I move past that and look at the bigger opportunity here? For us, that's been the biggest help that they've been able to contribute.
Yeah, and that's great advice, and appreciate you sharing your learnings there. I've enjoyed this conversation immensely. It's terrific to hear what Fairmart is doing, and I can only be excited for what you're embarking upon. But thank you for joining me this afternoon, and it'd be great to stay in touch.
Thank you, Tony. I appreciate you having us, and hopefully we'll be down in Australia soon as well.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Feedback is always welcome, and I would appreciate introductions to potential future guests to invite onto the podcast. But that's it for today. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.